Hey everybody, welcome to NGO Soul and Strategy. Today I am talking with Dorothy Nyambi. She is the president and chief executive of MEDA. And if you haven't heard of MEDA, MEDA is a Canadian headquartered international economic development organization that creates business solutions to poverty. And MEDA, important for us to understand, was started by Mennonite faith-based founders. So thank you very much, Dorothy. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Tosca, for having me. I'm glad to be here.
It's going to be great. You and I have had a really wonderful first conversation even before we thought about a podcast, when you approached me because you had read our book, Between Power and Irrelevance: The Future of Transnational NGOs, and you were interested in a conversation, and our conversations kept going after that, resulting in this podcast. So for our audience, I want to just introduce Dorothy for a moment. As I said before, she's the president and chief executive of MEDA. She's also a former executive vice president of the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. And I thought that was interesting because we don't have that many NGO leaders with that background. And you have,
And I'm not a mathematician, so keep
and
going.
you're not a mathematician even. No, in fact, you told me last time already that you are trained as a medical doctor, and then you moved, as you said so beautifully, you said, I moved upstream from a technical role, if you will, to an organizational management and leadership role. And you said, I feel like I am in upstream medicine. So I'm going to definitely ask you to unpack that a little bit. But to finish your bio, you also were a former regional director of the NGO Right to Play. So, Dorothy, tell me a bit and tell our audience, for those who don't know MEDA, what is MEDA all about?
Okay. Yes, no, Tosca, again, really grateful to have this opportunity. I joined MEDA in late 2018, so it's been 2 years. And MEDA, as you said, is an international development organization that is focused on business solutions to poverty, and started in 1953. It is one of the leaders in what we now know as microfinance, and in also what we call impact investment. So we've been working in the agricultural, agribusiness sector, which is the roots of the first project that MEDA started in Paraguay in 1953 to this date. So our focus moving forward is agri-food systems. We want to do that because we are going to be reaching the greatest number of women. Women across the developing world happen to be that bottom billion that who need to be pulled out of poverty. Secondly, it's also going to allow us the opportunity to really intervene in what we call addressing climate change, but from an agriculture, agribusiness sector.
Oh,
And
I see.
thirdly, we really, as MEDA, want to be the organization that is going to come in working with these smallholder farmers and everybody across the horizontal chain with this vertical sector, but doing so at a systems level. It's now we all know that it's time for us to build resilience in systems so that countries, people, communities can take care of themselves. So MEDA's really, I would say, competitive advantage is that we've been working with the private sector. We are one of the only NGOs that our counterpart on the other part of the world is the private sector.
Yeah.
So how do you, as a smallholder farmer, look at your work as a business and instead of just subsistence? So it's bringing that business approach and bringing the private sector to be a key player in the development arena.
And that's why I saw on your website reference made to moving up the value chain, etc., in the agro-foods subsector.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just to say, when we talk about the agri-food systems, it is way bigger. This is not just about plants, and it's plants, animals, fishery. It is on farm, off farm. It is really broad. So the
Okay.
vertical sector is agri-food system, but the horizontal is as wide as you can get.
Okay, okay, good. That sets a nice context then. We're going to devote this interview to change leadership, organizational change leadership. And you certainly, when you came in 2018, right, you definitely started initiating and driving and encouraging change. And as you wrote to me before this interview, you said, I'm going to bring myself into this interview as a Black woman driving to bring change to a white organization in a sector where white saviorism and specifically white male dominance is the majority. That is the lens that I bring to my change leadership.
Mhm.
So let's talk about what that means in terms of, for instance, the following questions. So when we look at MEDA as an organization, what kinds of organizational changes have you and others in MEDA who are championing this with you, obviously and necessarily, what kind of changes have you set in motion? Are we talking about strategy change, structural change, people changes, culture, business processes? What are we talking about?
Wow. So I was going to say we're talking about all of those, but
Okay.
let me step back and start a little bit from the beginning. No,
Yes.
absolutely. I'm bringing myself, when I join an organization or the work I do, I bring myself just as you've described it. And I want to say before then, if you think about MEDA, started in 1953. For MEDA to continue to be relevant till today, change has been happening. So this is not the first time MEDA is going through change. The world has been changing around MEDA, and MEDA actually has been a leader, pivoting and changing over time with this particular change. So this is just, I would say, another kind of change that's happening. So
Another generation.
absolutely. So I wanted to definitely say that it's not as though media has been stagnant all along.
Right.
So, I mean, coming in, as you know, over the past 10 years, there's been more than 10 years, there's been conversations in the sector about what we need to do to decolonize, aid, what we need to do to shift the power or to look at privilege and other things. And so joining in 2018, I really had the opportunity and the privilege that we're ending one strategic plan and beginning another. So we had a
Mm.
period in 2019 from March through till October where we actually worked, consulted, and planned on our current strategic plan. So when you ask me, which parts of change am I looking at? Is it structural? Is it people? Is it everything? I think when you're dealing with change, it is really important to have what's driving that change. Is that vision of where we want the organization to go. And the tool that's going to help us do that is our strategic plan, right? So we're not doing it in a vacuum per se. And the consultations that happen for that strategic plan and the key drivers within that strategic plan are the things that are bringing that kind of the shifts that we want to make. And
Mm.
so coming back to your question in terms of definitely in any kind of strategy and plan, we have to look and say, once we've figured out, the strategy and we've done the deep dive to understand the details of how we are going to convert that into operational units, then we say, what's the structure that we need to
Mhm.
make sure that this plan, the structure we have, goes with that. And then once we look at structure, we then look at what are the roles and responsibility within that structure system, that need to be in place and
Yeah.
everything. And so we're doing that. But overarching all of this, Tosca, is organizational culture.
So what does
So,
that mean to you, Dorothy? Organizational culture. How do I see that?
yeah. So I said, culture, very often we say it's complex, and I agree, but sometimes I disagree. Because
Mm.
for me, culture is not just the words we write, it is the behaviors and the habits.
Mhm.
It is about the politics and the influences within the organization and how those get exhibited on a regular and consistent basis.
That's right.
Right. So for me, those are the things that are important because you can have strategy, we can do all the unpacking, we lay it out in terms of this is how we get into doing the work and operationalize it. But culture is what really underlies all of that. Definitely, strategy also helps culture to evolve. There's no doubt. So it is pretty complex in that sense.
Yes, it is, and that's why we asked you to talk about, because it's a fascinating topic, but very complex and with so many interdependencies, right? As you just said.
Yeah.
So let's talk about one dimension, which is the psychology of change, right? Because you said at the beginning, you said, you know, you need, what is the change about, right? Why the change, etc. And you said, so we need that vision, and that is embodied in the strategic plan. As you know, there are some kind of, in academia, there's some change framework people, authors, who would say that, and John Cotter is one of those classics, who would say, don't start with vision, start with urgency. So, and if a sense of urgency is not there, then people's hesitation, enthusiasm, and or resistance may be a bigger problem. So let's talk about the psychology of change, people and how they experience change.
Sure.
What have you observed in MEDA at a more generalized level, and how have you worked with that as a leader?
So, you know, no, absolutely. Glad you mentioned John Cotter, because I totally believe in him as well. You know, and so I think, you know, change is about people.
Mm-hmm.
When I say the vision is embodied in the strategy, but the vision is really about people. It's about, you know, building that army, that coalition to see it. Remember at the beginning, I said what I bring into this conversation is myself. I'm a Black woman. I'm an African. I'm a settler in Canada. And I'm working in a sector which is very heavily Caucasian male. And so in terms of how not really directives, in terms of visioning, and what has driven the sector has been out of that sort of racial bucket. And so here I come as a Black woman to a
Yeah.
white organization. I certainly understand the politics, because every organization has it, even the faith-based organizations. The church is political, so every organization is political. And
Right.
so with that, you know, there's a vision. And so I have to be careful. I want to drive it, but there's a certain level of fear, because with a vision that is saying, oh, let's think about how we share the power in terms of who we work, so that we continue to be relevant, and we actually, you know, set up ourselves to say the work we've done for the past 50 years has made a difference. We cannot be working in 2020 the way we worked in 1945, right? So in so doing, I think what I'm trying to say is, it's been about sharing a vision, but as a Black person, how do I do it and make sure that I have enough allies who can
Mm.
also amplify it? Because it's not about, people don't take it because it's coming from me. I think it is the same mechanism. If, you know, I have children, sometimes I have to go get my cousin or my friend to tell the children the same thing, so
Yes.
that they can listen.
Yeah.
And so as managers and change leaders, anybody who is a parent, you know, you don't need to go to a business school to honestly pick up how to lead change. You
Oh,
know,
that's
there's so much.
brilliant. I hadn't thought about that. That it's the same principle. You're
It's
right.
the same principle. I'm a mother of children, and of many children, and there are many ways of doing it. You know, you want to lead and you go find somebody else to come help you,
Mm.
and so on. So I think that is okay. But I think for me, it is that ability of making sure that there are enough people who can amplify, you know, that vision.
Yeah.
And, you know, how do I build that coalition of the willing
Yeah.
in a sector and an organization where there's fear, you know, I'm different. And so not only physically different, but cognitively different.
I
And I
see.
think that is really the important part. When they get leaders like me on board, is the cognitive difference we bring.
That's very interesting, because when we think, and I'm jumping for a moment to the end of the questions that I had in mind, namely when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, which is now very much kind of de rigueur to talk about that, even though we've been accused as a sector of not being open to this, this is not the first time, right? We've gone through some earlier waves. Um, but when we talk about that, we often think about diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, ability, class, education, etc., etc. But your point of cognitive diversity is an important one.
Yes.
and something that I also care about. I think that sometimes we actually lack that too. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now, before we go deeper into the kind of the complexity and the fascination that, for me at least, change management has, you mentioned something before we started about how you and those your change coalition, as you said, when it comes to MEDA's role, see it as under your new strategy as needing to evolve to one of facilitation and convening and brokering. Tell
Yes.
me, that means the role has to go from what to what, and how will you get there?
Hmm. So I think MEDA, like all, transnational northern NGOs, we've grown out of a system of you open a sub office, you create a branch in the field, you have a project office. We have all kinds of different models that we do that. And in 2019, when we talked about, how do we shift power to the South, it wasn't about just taking your current structure and shifting places. I think Oxfam and others have tried that, Action Aid. I'm talking about how do you look at your own structure and your own role?
Mm-hmm.
As another NGO, what is the role? What role can we play? There is a place for us, and how can we facilitate? And that's big change because, again, remember, change is about people. And people who work in the sector, we all come with what I call divided loyalty. Everybody, we all want to believe that we 100% we're doing this because we believe in mission and vision. But I say we're all in it with a divided loyalty. We are
Also,
in it. How so? Because we're doing it because we're earning a living whilst doing good work. So there's nobody who will keep doing this for 10 years, out of this, without getting paid.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Dorothy, because I think we need to be more honest about that.
We have to be honest. We have to look at it in the face. And so with that also, I want to come back to the change and what it means and how I've been trying to maneuver it, because at the end of the day, it's about people's identity. The people who work in this sector, white or black, their identity now is I'm an international development worker. It comes with certain accolades. It comes with certain power. It comes with certain beliefs that you're out there putting yourself and suffering, even though you might not be. So there's a certain way that society has positioned people. And when we start to talk about let's devolve, share, open the pie, and bring out that lens in terms of how do we get the voices and the power from the South together, there's fear, right? So I think for me, it's about really, just like John Curtis said, it's going to be happening in lots of places. It's not as organized, as we think.
Mm-hmm.
And again, MEDA is an organization that's been highly organized. It's 53-year-old. It's not a startup in any way. So I worked in, like, Right to Play was a startup. And so things you could do, John Cotter's, very fast. But so there's trade-offs because you want to make sure, and I want to make sure that the people at MEDA come along the journey because they know the organization, they've been there, absolutely highly valued. So with that, I think for me, not the challenge, the opportunity is to really work to make sure that we're not trying to do change management just as this one project, just like John Cotter said, let it be that it's happening in different places within the organization. You
Mm-hmm.
really want your periphery to be part of it, and then, in an iterative manner, keep going at it.
I see. I want to ask you a little bit more about that shift in role, right? From what I imagine you mean is some forms of direct implementation in the
Yes.
sphere of MEDA, meaning business solutions to poverty and especially to women in poverty. To that, a role of facilitation, brokering, and convening. So obviously, that last role means different. You need different competencies, right,
Yes.
in the organization. You need different mindsets. You need different habits and behaviors,
Mhm.
correct? I'm just
Yep.
thinking loud here, right? And it may also mean a different size or a different board, for instance. So how, I mean, is it too early for me to ask you and the organization where you are at in terms of articulating all those downstream implications, to use your earlier word, for of that change in role?
Role. So with that changing role, so I said, how do we become more of a convener? So that by becoming a convener, and I'll come to those points you raised, by becoming a convener, it means that we've recognized that there's a certain level of capacity in the global south.
Mm-hmm.
So we first have to come to that realization, and which is a mindset shift, which is a behavior and habit shift, right? So those things, two things need to happen first at our level. So then we can then recognize that if there's capacity in the global south, how then do we help people come together, diagnose what their own problems are? We help them, we still have a voice, we still have a place, we give their opinion, they share their opinion, but they drive their own agenda of what they want to do. So that mindset shift, I think, as you said, Tosca, it is so important, but it is totally linked to who we are as a sector. Because if I'm talking to that young female or male international development worker who is associated to this sector because, they, they feel in many ways, they have, it's a savior mentality, which people don't say it, but they carry it.
Oh,
And,
yes.
and that savior mentality, I want to be really clear that while they call it white savior mentality, we are also hearing it a lot. I'm a Black person in the diaspora. And, I need to watch myself to make sure I don't carry that mentality,
Mm.
as I go down into the global south.
Mm.
So it was really interesting. Recently, there was an article published by a Ugandan farmer. I don't have the details, but he actually says the white and Black people don't understand poverty. And he was talking about like the Black people in the diaspora, right? So there is all of that where, some of us have lost that credibility, even with the Black people. And here we are caught in the middle in many ways,
Right.
so
Right.
many things. But coming back very quickly to the shift in terms of the role,
Yeah.
absolutely behavior. But I want to just touch on one point. The other thing is we cannot do this because we function because of the donors. And I want to call out the institutional donors. Because
Right.
our private donors, I would say that, if we work hard and we work authentically, we can bring them along. But institutional donors need to get out of this fact about, oh, all the specialists and those who know are in the global north, right? And so that's why we carry that mentality. And
So
so
are you saying, Dorothy, that institutional donors have kind of reinforced or backed up the kind of saviorism that we see amongst ourselves as staff?
absolutely they have. Absolutely they have. Absolutely they have. They expect you. I will speak in Canada where they talk about direction and control. We are supposed to have the experts. We're supposed to go manage it in the South and control. And so we even have a taxation act that supports us to do that. So that's another level of barriers that we need to face.
So, but how does our sector go about influencing the habits and mindsets of institutional donors when we haven't been, let's face it, that successful in changing their mindset about some other things like the overhead myth until recently, and a few, the double reporting and all of that.
I mean, I think I always like to quote Maya Angelou, that I do what I do now because this is what I know. Now that I know better, I'm going to do better. I think there are many things and many times in our sector where we've said, oh, we're going to change. But I feel like this is an existential moment. This is a turn point where if we miss the opportunity as a sector, I don't think it will come again for another 2 generations or 30 generations. So I feel like the time is now,
Hmm.
different from other times because of the things that have happened, you
Hmm.
know, and so on. So COVID has come. I think it is never good to when people die, but I think COVID has come and put in front of us things that we didn't think were possible, they're not possible, and really bed open the fact that there's capacity elsewhere and it doesn't all lie with us.
Yes, and you think that that truly has created a shift that we can seize, uh, in other words, not return to normal, etc., if we want to.
Yes, I don't know that there's any return to normal. It is almost like, a colleague of mine said the other day that, I mean, when we came to 2020 and COVID came in,
Yeah.
it was almost like we went from 2019 to 2030 in terms of the changes we needed to make.
Mm.
And so we cannot take a computer, as my colleague told me, that we cannot take a computer built in 2021 and go and put a 1995 operating system in it.
Right.
That's how he put it to me. And I thought that analogy was really great.
That was, yes. Okay, now I'm going to bring you back into the kind of not nuts and bolts of change management, but into operationalizing culture change, right? So you were saying to you, your mind, and I think exactly like you in that regard, habits and behaviors are ultimately which habits and behaviors are constantly reinforced and favored and which are discouraged, right?
Yes.
So how how do you assess as a leader, and again those who are with you in this change process, how do you assess whether culture change is happening in MEDA
In
over
that
time?
all the time. I think it has to do with the conversations and the questions coming back and the suggestions that are coming back, right? So I'll say, we start at a point where you want to address culture change. It's not a mathematical problem in any way, right? It is things that are going to be happening iteratively. It is, having a strategy, and that strategy is what's going to drive us. Many organizations will have a strategic plan every 3 to 5 years, but they just go on doing what they do. A strategic plan becomes this iterative thing you do, and the
Yeah.
board and everybody goes through a process. So for us, the fact that we're having a strategy and we want to implement that strategy is already asking for a culture shift, right? So again, it is how people ask questions. It is how people bring back suggestions. It is the other things that you begin to see that's showing up in terms of the work, the design of the projects, how people are talking about the financial system, how they want to involve others. So there are lots of small wins that
Mm-hmm.
are happening all the time because people are informing themselves, but they're also seizing the opportunity to begin to exhibit that shift in their own day-to-day work.
To exhibit that shift, yeah, well said. Yeah. um you talked a little bit about politics and power
Hmm.
very early on in our interview, and that's another just absolutely fascinating aspect of change management, isn't it?
Yes.
Um, so, what have you learned, Dorothy, as a change leader about politics and power within an organization like MEDA, how it is distributed and how people maneuver politically? And again, I appreciate we want to talk about this in general terms, but is there something you can lift up from your observations on that?
That. I think, politics, I would like to look at it always in three categories. I always try to say there's politics, there's power, then there's influence, right?
Yeah.
So, and for me, politics is the most important. Again, at MEDA and many faith-based organizations, MEDA is my second faith-based organization where I'm working. They
Yeah.
were like, we don't do politics. There's no politics here. And my response is always, if the church is political, there's nowhere else that is free of politics. And so I think it is really coming in and understanding that politics. And I mean, I come in and I spend time, I make sure I try to understand the politics before you get in. It's too late to try to
How do
be,
you do that?
pardon.
How do you do that, Dorothy, to understand the politics before you come in?
Before, to understand the politics before you come in. I think you talk, I mean, at the level of a CEO, there's a hiring committee that, is charged to hire you and everything. I think for me, I would say very personally, I feel really blessed, that the board, the hiring committee, they were open with me, honest with me. And I think for me, that's what's keeping me, really feeling strong and believing in, what I call, my sense of not just the sense of urgency, but the sense of that MEDA is going to be on the right path and it's going to be a leader amongst organizations to try to make this shift, to try to adapt to this changing world and everything.
Were you basically trying to gauge for kind of appetite for change amongst others?
Yep, no, gauge for appetite for change, and then just the level of information that you get given as a newcomer or even before you get in, it absolutely demonstrated for me the authenticity. But it also allowed me to gauge the politics, right, and everything. And so you read a lot, you talk, you get collateral information, right? So I might not have been at MEDA, but there were people who knew people who had not necessarily been at MEDA, but just people who had been in other Mennonite organizations
To
who
observe,
who
Nida.
reached out to me and everything. So it was really important in that way. And I think it was about just informing myself
Mm,
and coming in, realizing that it takes is beyond being bold. It's about coming in, being humble, and knowing that you're very different, and that that there's a lot of I would just use the word fear. I wouldn't even say uncertainty. It comes with fear. And so how do you help to allay that fear? So
I am going to probe a little bit on, you've now used the word fear 3 times at least, right? So what's that fear about?
I think the fear is about, is the change going to be too much? You know, is
Okay.
the change, is as I said, we all have dual convictions why we're in this thing, is if am I gonna have my job? The politics and the power and the influence, the leaders who were there before, if they're no longer there, who know me, what do I need to do and how do I gain that space again?
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah, yeah. And I was interrupting you when you started to talk about these 3 categories of politics, power, and influence. So, uh, would you mind going back to those 3, how you distinguish them and how you work with them as a change leader?
Change agent. So I think for me, when I think about influence, everybody has influence. No matter where you sit, you have your sphere of influence. As a parent, as a program manager, as a field, that's your influence, right? That is something that you can do to affect the outcome of what you do. And I then believe that, people then take all those influences and they put it together, and that's what brings power. Right?
Hmm.
You have to have influence. You cannot have power if you don't have influence. So
Right.
what are you trying to influence? And so that's it, so I look at it, and I mean, I'm speaking out of, the organization I work for now, but it is, everybody has influence. So everybody has power because they can gather it and it turns into power. And so for me as a change leader, that's why I really like, John Carter's, change leadership, because it is really understanding that all those power pockets exist.
Yes.
And for you to make change, you have to get into all those power buckets
Yes.
where
Yes.
those influences sit,
Yes.
make sure that change happens.
I would love to be a fly on the wall and observe you moving around those power pockets. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Um,
And the other thing that I was going to say, in all of that, I consider myself a feminist leader. I know you're doing a podcast on feminist leadership and all of that, but for me, there are trade-offs, certainly. But my approach to it is really, it's not to be domineering. It's not to be, I am not your typical example of the solid handshake, white man. That's who a leader is. That's not me. Right? And that's what I bring to the table. And so we talk about feminist leadership. I feel like, I'm giving a dose of it, to me, that we talk about it, but what it looks like, what it feels like, it's not as easy as people think.
right, right. So let's talk about both feminist leadership, but also about diversity or lack of diversity in leadership, where what MEDA will where MEDA will go in that regard, aligned with this change in strategy and role, etc. Right? Um, and that white savior complex and that white supremacy culture, that white male dominance that you mentioned at the beginning of the interview. So I know you have observations on this. So how do you see those topics related to where MEDA needs to go in order to continue to be relevant, but in a different way than it was relevant before?
I think, I mean, first I have to say that I feel so much that with our strategic plan, we're ahead of the game already. And so now it's, getting the teams, others to come along with the strategic plan. It's like a marathon. Not everybody is on board at the same time, for sure.
Yeah.
And so, but I think I want to step back and say, talking about diversity and leadership, it is really about, number one, I feel, how do we begin to value and honor what I call lived experience?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you can believe that lived experience, it doesn't matter what color you are, but that lived experience becomes important in our sector, then we'll begin to say, who are those who are bringing certain amount of lived experience? And how do we take that and really allow it to shape our thinking and everything? Because diversity is not just about being on the table. Many people have been at tables where you can be at the table, but nobody's listening to you. You can be
Mm.
at the table, and even if they're listening to you, they're not hearing,
Mm.
right? So diversity is not about checking the box. It's not about, again, being at the table. That's not enough. It's one part to be at the table and so on. So for me, number one, it is being able to uh, recognize lived experience. Number two for me is really looking at that pipeline, looking at the pipeline of diverse leaders from the board level all the way, to the field.
Yes.
What's that pipeline that is being encouraged, that, things have been put in place to make sure that they come and they stay. Because I think I haven't looked at it in great detail, but a lot of, diverse or racially different groups, what's the retention rate? It's not about just hiring and checking. What's happening for people to be retained? What
Very
are
important indicator.
for people to feel included,
Yes.
right? So, and that starts from the board level all the way, to the field,
Yeah.
right? And I think for me, thirdly, it is just about, when we talk about we want to include voices from the global south, if we don't fix the power dynamics and we look at that in places where colonialism is a factor, the missionary history is a factor,
Mhm.
because all those things are colliding to not necessarily distort people's mind, but they're affecting the behaviors on the other side.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah, and they may still be remnants of, in this case, missionary behavior in the culture, right? In the belief systems that are more covert, if you will.
Very
Yeah.
so covert, and I think that is where it is, people, there's a good heart, you want to do good thing, there's everybody has a good heart, but how that plays out and is interpreted by the other side, I think it is, we need to become really emotionally intelligent to really be able to read how the other side is interpreting us. Because,
Mm.
you know I mean, just as you said the other day, Tosca, that when we say we're not a charity, we can say everything, we're not a charity, but the governments in the south and the people in the south, they perceive us as charity. So
Yes.
until we begin to learn to hear them, listen to them, and understand them,
Yes.
then we cannot really shift that power and give it and let their voice be meaningful, in shaping where we go.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are some people who think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and who say not until a more diverse body of people in an organization has been able to change the ways of working of MEDA in this case, and even the very definition of what the work of MEDA is, will we have a more diverse and equitable and inclusive organization. To what extent does that ring true for you in the MEDA context? So the influencing, the ways of working, and the very definition of what MEDA needs to work on.
Mm. I think certainly you need, one person cannot do it. It's not because, I'm the head of MEDA that I'm not the solution to colonization, racism. I'm part of the process that's going to help to make it happen and so on. So we need everybody, we need every single race. So I think, there's the power, as they say, you need more than, one third of any kind of people to be able to get their thought process built, implanted in. If
Mm.
you have one person, they may easily, cycle them out. If you have two people, they pit them against each other, right? So there's some studies around all of that, why, we talk about the 30%. I just said, you just need more. But I really think it is about, allyship and accomplices, people who want to be on this journey, with not just, those who feel racialized. It will take those who don't feel racialized to train those who feel racialized for us to succeed. And, you talked about, the sort of the work at MEDA. I think for us, it is really about the bigger NGO sector. The NGO sector, as I said, we have split loyalty. Whether we like it or not, we have to be honest. At the end of the day, we all want to maintain our jobs. And so NGOs have been driven so much by the budget. You say, oh, a big NGO is an NGO that has a big budget. So it's all about, looking for more money, doing more. But there's nothing that says that you need more money to get more results.
Right.
So we now need to figure out, what is that most effective and efficient way to get the best results. It may mean less money, it may mean more money and everything. But you had asked me a question earlier. As we look at it, and I think, MEDA is no exception. I don't think there's any Northern NGO that over time, our sizes in North America are bound to reduce, right?
I think so too.
So that's a truth conversation that is hard to have, but that, we need to talk about it. And that in fact affects me. I need to say, am I going to be relevant? Do they need me even, right? But I want to be sure that we're doing it in a manner that those who we want to serve feel like they're ready for it, they're ready to take, and they're ready. We've been at this for more than 50 years,
I know.
So
I know.
it is sometimes difficult for me to hear that there's still poor people. There are poor people in Canada too.
Yes. And in the US, plenty
Yeah.
also. Yes. Gosh, I feel like there are several other questions I would like to ask you, but we do need to bring this interview to a close. So let me ask you, Dorothy, in closing, if people want to learn more about you, where should they go? Where can they find out more about you? How could they contact you if you're open to that?
Oh, absolutely. I, I mean, the MEDA website, www.meda.org, will be my
Okay.
first port of call. That's where you see me. I'm certainly on LinkedIn, but definitely, I think, I'm humbled by the opportunity given to me by MEDA to be in this space at this time. And I want to walk the journey with MEDA and not sort of as an individual, because I think as an individual, there's only so much I can achieve. As an organization, they can actually shape the discourse for the sector.
You can, and it sounds like to me like both MEDA as an organization entity and you as a leader have that capability to shape the discourse and the sector, and I sure hope that you will do that. I feel very encouraged by this conversation, so I want to thank you, Dorothy, for coming on to our podcast. Thank you for your insights. It's been fascinating. I can see that you have many more insights on change leadership that I and others need to learn about. So thank you also, listeners, for checking us out today. If you found this podcast stimulating, then please help other social sector leaders to find the podcast by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. If you're interested in the book that we have been citing, that's Between Power and Irrelevance, The Future of Transnational NGOs, co-authored with George Mitchell and Hans-Peter Schmitz. And if you want to find out more about these materials and other things, then please go to my website, fiveoaksconsulting.org. This is Tosca, and I look forward to spending time with you on NGO, Soul and Strategy next time. Thank you so much, Dorothy.